just to kind of review some of the basics in case anyone's tuning in that is newer, because there's always families that are kind of entering the fold who have just found out that their kiddo has Barth. So, every human has DNA in their cells, and DNA is what kind of controls how our cells ultimately behave and function. And sometimes there's changes in the DNA, and sometimes the changes don't mean anything, and sometimes they actually improve something, and sometimes they make something worse. And in the case of Barth syndrome, there are changes in the DNA sequence for a gene called tafazin. Um, and what that ends up doing is impacting the mitochondria. So if this is a human cell here, the cell is full of mitochondria. That's what a cartoon version of one looks like. I think a lot of people are familiar from their maybe high school days of hearing that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. That's kind of the stereotypical thing that people say.
Yeah.
And what it does is it makes energy. And every cell in the body, with the exception of red blood cells, has mitochondria. And some cell types have more mitochondria. So you can think about organs like the heart that do a lot of constant work. They have a lot more mitochondria than maybe a blood cell, a different, type of blood cell would. And so in somebody who does not have Barth, the mitochondria have all these little nooks and crannies. And it's actually formed because there's two sets of membranes. So you can almost think of like two fences that pack a lot of small proteins inside the mitochondria in order to make the energy. And all of the energy making machinery is shown here, and it's not important what they are for this purpose, but they kind of do all their work in these little nooks and crannies. So it's really important that the mitochondria has all these tiny and tight folds because that's what puts all the machinery together in order to do the work. In Barth syndrome, what ends up happening is that when this gene isn't working right, there's a pileup of a special fat called cardiolipin. And cardiolipin lives on this inner membrane. And the pileup happens because the very mature form of cardiolipin doesn't get made. So, kind of an immature form, which you'll hear referred to as MLCL or monolysocardiolipin, it's a real mouthful. Um, it causes a pileup of that, and the mitochondria become misshapen. So you can see this one's swollen. It's like bigger, and the
Yeah.
folds aren't as tight. And so what happens is it puts the machinery further apart from each other, and they just don't make energy as efficiently. And that's where everything kind of starts from. So if you can't make enough energy, then all of these other things start to happen. But Elamipretide, they found, is kind of like a molecular glue, and it pulls all the folds closer together. So
Okay.
it's just helping the mitochondria have a more normal shape so that all the pieces of the machinery that make energy can work together again in a more efficient way.
Okay.
Um, so that's kind of an overview of how that works. I don't know if you have any questions from
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I think like when our cardiologist explained kind of this to us, like the thing that I took away in my mind was like, okay, it's almost as if his mitochondria are having a hard time like communicating across the mitochondria because, and she mentioned, and maybe we'll get into that, like ATP.
Yeah,
Like,
so that is the energy. That's like the currency
okay.
that the mitochondria make so that the cells can do their other jobs, right? So ATP is the payload from all of this machinery here. And it's kind of clipped off right there. But you need ATP. It's like paying tolls so that the cell will do the rest of its job. And if you can't do that and the mitochondria looks more like this, they start to make kind of unhealthy byproducts, something called reactive oxygen species that makes the mitochondria unhappy, which then spills stuff into the bigger part of the cell and makes the cell unhappy. And they just don't do work. They don't do the work that they need to as much as they should.
Okay. And so like the elmipretide, like you said, it's kind of like a glue, so it kind of like bridges that gap
Yeah.
between the,
It's just kind of pulling everything together so that this turns back into this, right? So it's turning more into, a bean shaped object where, again, it has all those tight folds because that's where all the work is getting done.